Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So I'm going to wait a couple of minutes so that people can tune in before I get started. There are some developments that I want to bring to your attention. Before I get started, I just want to make sure that the audio is fine. If you all can let me know in the comments, throw up a 7 if the audio and the visuals are fine. Just throw up a shout out to Water Sniper 2. Yeah, just throw up a 7 if the audio is fine, if the video is fine. I would appreciate it so I can get started. Thanks a lot, everybody. Shout out to Covina Man. Shout out to Never See, Come See. Shout out to Water Sniper 2. All right, so I just want to get into some things, a couple of developments in this case. And I may do one separate video from this talking about the autopsy. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a separate video dealing with the autopsy. But for this video right here, I want to talk about some things that are suspect, some things that are going on with these protests that raise great suspicions. Um, I read a couple of reports alleging that the protest movement has been infiltrated by white supremacists who are basically trying to make the protests more violent. They're trying to basically discredit the movement by acting as agent provocateurs. And I believe that the government may also have agent provocateurs in these protests in order to spark more conflict, in order to justify heavy-handed approach by law enforcement, and in order to help Donald Trump get reelected. So what I'm going to do is go through these stories, and then I'm going to break down like why I reached this particular conclusion. There were some developments yesterday in D.C. The president made some remarks, and I'm going to get into those remarks as well. So first, let's go to these stories about white supremacists infiltrating the movement. I'm going to play this audio from CBS News. Hopefully, you all can hear it fine. I'm going to turn it up.
George Floyd in Minneapolis. Today, President Trump urged authorities to, quote, get tougher. In Tallahassee, Florida today, a pickup drove into a crowd protesting police brutality. Witnesses say the driver revved his engine before moving forward. No serious injuries are reported. It was one of several demonstrations across the country. CBS's Jeff Gaze begins our coverage in Minneapolis. Over the last few nights, Minnesota has seen its share of violence and arson. But tonight could be the most dangerous night of all. Law enforcement officials believe that extremist organizations have infiltrated the protest, intent on stirring up trouble. After 5 nights of violence, federal and state officials now have a better idea of the thinking behind it. Attorney General William Barr.
The voices of peaceful protests are being hijacked by violent radical elements.
Investigators are pointing to white supremacist organizations and far-left-wing extremist groups as being responsible for some of the violence.
Okay, so you heard that portion. They basically said that white supremacists, and they said far left leaning groups as well, are behind a lot of the violence that we're seeing in these protests and demonstrations. And, I was just, as I watched these protests and demonstrations, I thought to myself, a couple of things, and I'll get to your comments in a second. I thought to myself a couple of things. I thought that it was unusual that you had these protests in cities that have large black populations, but the majority of the protesters are white. For me, that raises a red flag, and no disrespect to genuine allies in the movement. I fully support coalitions. I fully support, people that are concerned about this issue, regardless of their race, that want to be a part of the demonstrations and protests. But never have I seen, this large number of white participants in these types of demonstrations. Whether we're talking about the demonstrations in in Ferguson for Michael Brown, or we're talking about the Trayvon Martin protests and demonstrations, and even the Ahmaud Arbery demonstrations did not have nowhere near as many white participants in those demonstrations. And you know, the protests go on and on. You have the Eric Garner protests. Don't recall seeing that many white faces in those protests. So for me, that was a red flag. And then you have these reports saying that there is some evidence that white supremacists have infiltrated these protests. You know, a lot of the pictures and the images that you see, a lot of the people that are committing these acts of violence in terms of bashing windows, graffiti, and setting fires and stuff like that, a lot of the images that I see are white people committing these acts. And that raises suspicions for me. And we know throughout history there have been agent provocateurs, and this is something that I mentioned in my very first video where I did my response to the protests. I mentioned the fact that there could be agent provocateurs. And what agent provocateurs do is they try to destroy a movement by getting the legitimate protesters arrested, or you know, trying to antagonize legitimate protesters or encourage them to commit illegal activities so that the whole movement can not only be discredited, but so that the movement can be literally shut down and destroyed. So when you have these acts of violence, then that becomes an excuse for them to bring in the National Guard. It becomes an excuse for them to bring in military personnel as well. And I'm going to get into the statements that Donald Trump made along those lines, but it gives them the excuse to arrest mass numbers of people. It gives them the excuse to use excessive force. It gives them the excuse to completely shut down what started as a legitimate movement for social justice. And instead of the conversation being a conversation about police reform, instead of it being a conversation about justice for George Floyd and all the other countless victims of police brutality, it turns into a discussion about fires and looting and windows being smashed and all that kind of stuff. It totally hijacks the discussion and the movement and sends it in the wrong direction. Also, I came across another story dealing with these extremists that are infiltrating the movement. And I'll get to your comments in a second. So I saw this article on Vice News. And I'll post links to all these articles in the description box so that you can check it out. But this article says a white man from Illinois allegedly brought bombs to start a riot at the Minneapolis George Floyd protests. This man went all the way from Galesburg, Illinois, and traveled to Minneapolis. And I did a search online to see how long of a trip that is. That's a 6.5 hour long trip. This man drove that far, and they said that he's been charged with civil disorder, possession of unregistered explosives, and participating in organizing riots. And this is a white man. I would be interested in knowing more about his background. And it goes on to say this. It says that his arrest, and this man's name is Matthew Rupert, and it says that his arrest offers some support to local officials' claim that outside agitators may be partially responsible for the violence that has accompanied some of the protests in Minneapolis. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail in that article. But I was also reading, well, actually, I heard it on CNN. They were talking about the demonstrations in New York. And they were talking about how 1 in 7 of the protesters or the people that were arrested for protesting in New York were from outside of New York City. So you got these people that aren't even indigenous to these cities traveling to these cities, causing problems and, engaged in acts of violence. And I just want to be perfectly clear. Like, I think, the top priority should be this police brutality, this impact in our community. I'm more concerned about the lives of black people, black lives, than I am concerned about property. And it's just unfortunate that the discussion ends up being a discussion about property damage when you have people like this literally hijacking our legitimate movement for social justice. And before I go back into this article, I just want to mention one other thing before I forget. And I was listening to CNN, and they were talking about how these white supremacists are even posing as if they are a part of Antifa. And Antifa stands for anti-fascist. It's like this movement where you have these people that are militantly against racism, and it's a white radical movement. And they're basically trying to hijack that movement, by putting out false tweets, making it appear as if Antifa is advocating violence and stuff, making it appear as if Antifa is some kind of terrorist organization. And that's exactly what people like Donald Trump want to happen. They want to have the movement labeled as terrorist. They want to have the movement labeled as extreme, so that way they can justify the crackdown on our movement, to justify the destruction of our movement. And if you know the history of the counterintelligence program, how they actually declare war on black leadership and black organizations, you know that this is a part of that history, and that's what's going on. So let's go back into this story about this guy from Illinois that traveled all the way to Minneapolis to help spark off some riots. So this article says that they caught him on. He was live streaming on Facebook, bragging about renting hotel rooms in Minneapolis. And there's actually a video showing him handing out explosives and encouraging protesters to throw them at the police. Encouraging protesters to throw them at the police. I mean, that sets up protesters to get shot by these police. It sets up the protesters to get arrested and end up spending years upon years in jail. It's designed to destroy the movement. And I wouldn't be surprised, even though this person is arrested, like, I want to know more about this person. Sometimes these agent provocateurs, they get arrested and stuff to keep up appearances, to make it appear like this person was some kind of, legitimately a part of some kind of movement or whatever, but really they're just working for the federal government. That's what happens sometimes. You know how you watch these movies, for instance, where somebody is gone deep cover or whatever, like even literally the movie Deep Cover, where this guy goes deep cover and he infiltrates this crime syndicate or whatever, or even like the Johnny Brasco movie where the guy is infiltrating the mob. And then, when the police crack down on the mob or on these organizations, these criminal organizations, they often arrest the agents to make it appear like that agent is still a part of that organization or whatever, so they don't immediately blow that agent's cover. And that's what may be happening here, where they are literally setting up activists, setting them up to get locked up, set to get killed by these police. Because anytime you're throwing bombs and explosives, the police can be justified to use deadly force against you. So it's a setup. And then this article goes further. So I mentioned that he was handing out explosives to protesters. So yeah, I'll post a link to this in the description box so that you can check this out. And then I saw this other article on the Daily Mail that someone on Facebook posted. And I'll include this as well in the description box so that you all can check this out. But it talks about, like, it shows pictures of piles of bricks just stacked up neatly along the route of these protesters. It's like they were ready made and set up for these protesters to grab them and throw them and use them to smash windows. It says, pallets of bricks have randomly appeared during protests across the U.S. this weekend, sparking theories that they were planted to stoke violence. and it says videos from New York City, Kansas City, Dallas, and Fayette in North Carolina all appear to show piles of bricks unattended in the middle of protests. And I don't think that's a coincidence. And I'll post this article again so that you all can read this, so you all could check this out. And like while I was watching CNN, like while we were watching CNN, we're looking on CNN, and usually CNN has like that column on the right side of their screen, like as news is developing, they keep that column on the side of the screen talking about the coronavirus, letting us know how many people have contracted the virus, letting us know how many people have died from the virus. Then the last time it was over 100,000 people. And you mean to tell me all of a sudden they're not as concerned about that virus? All of a sudden they're just not even talking about that virus at all. Instead, they're focusing solely on these protests. And that just seems to be odd. That seems to be just out of place. And, I just want to go on a little bit further about this. So then you have this president, condemning governors around the country, saying they're not doing enough to crack down, saying that if they don't do enough, then he's going to bring in the military to get the job done, to crush these protests, to stop these protests. And he actually said that in D.C., he was deploying the military, and that's exactly what he did. He deployed the military. And while he's talking about how he has no problem with the peaceful protesters, how he supports peaceful protests, he's bringing in these military forces to push out these nonviolent protesters. Even before this curfew was had passed, he pushed out the demonstrators. He literally had these military personnel use their shields to push the protesters. He also, these police also shot tear gas into the crowd, dispersing the crowd, using force to push the crowd out of the way. And after he pushes the crowd out of the way, this man did that solely so that he could do a photo op in front of a church, so that he could pose with the Bible up, and so that he could talk about law and order. And we all know, like if you study politics, you know that that's a common theme with the far right elected officials. They want to emphasize law and order, especially a man whose campaign deliberately pandered to white supremacists and racists, deliberately pandered to people that hate minorities, hate the immigrants, hate black people and stuff like that. And this is just an extension of it. Just like Nixon had the law and order push, you have this man doing the same thing. He is using this for his campaign. And that's what makes me think about this whole connection between these agent provocateurs and Donald Trump. This benefits Donald Trump because it makes him appear to be strong, even though he's soft and he's a punk. Because when they were protesting, this man hid in some kind of bunker, and now he wants to pretend like he's all strong and like these governors are weak. But anyway, it's like he's using this to make it appear that he's strong at a time right before an election. He's trying to make it appear that he's law and order and he's tough on crime and all that kind of stuff. And we know that that kind of message resonates with white supremacists. It resonates with ultra conservatives. And that's why he's doing it. And also it completely changes the discussion. When you have people committing this violence around the country, no longer are they talking about this pandemic that has had a devastating impact on the economy. No longer are they talking about all the people that have lost their jobs and how, the economy is going downhill and all these other topics that are detrimental to Donald Trump. Now they're talking about law and order. Now they're focused on, this man saying he's going to crack down. It's like if you create a problem and then you you try to fix that problem. It's making it seem like you are the one that saved the people from the problem, when in fact you are the source of the problem. And like, I don't have any definitive proof that any of these, these agent provocateurs are connected to the federal government, but I would not be surprised. And we know that in the past, that's what they used to destroy groups like the Black Panther Party. That's what they used to destroy protests led by the Reverend Martin Luther King. They would plant these agent provocateurs in those protests to destroy those movements. So yeah, I just wanted to hop on here and share these thoughts about these protests. I fully support those who are genuine allies to our movement. Whether they are white or Latino or Asian. If you are truly committed to the movement for social justice, I support you, and I support what you're doing. And I'm proud of the people that have joined this movement. And throughout history, you had situations like this. So it's no disrespect to those people, but I'm concerned about these infiltrators that are using our movement to promote their own agenda. That's my concern. And the fact that you have so many, non-black people participating in this movement, totally rebuts the arguments raised by these people that are so against coalitions. These people that use terms like "hold your own nuts" and all that other stupid stuff. It totally rebuts that. It totally rebuts this notion that we're in this struggle solely alone. We need to build coalitions if we want to make a difference. But let me see what you all are saying. I want to thank you all for tuning in, and hopefully later on I'll be back on here with another video talking about this autopsy. But today is a busy day because today is election day. I'm about to go back out there and finish some last minute campaigning. But yeah, I want to thank you all for tuning in. So let's see what folks are saying. Again, shout out to Water Snipers. Shout out to Never See, Come See. Shout out to Covina Man. Um, yeah, so Water Sniper said he agrees. And Covina Man said that they're likely working in conjunction with somebody in the White House. And I agree with that. I mean, I agree that that's a high probability because it does nothing but help Donald Trump. It helps change the narrative, helps change the discussion completely away from this catastrophe that's going on to a discussion about uh, protests and the riots and all that kind of stuff. And drowned it in that discussion is like, the whole issue that people are out there protesting. Instead of us talking about the need to end police brutality, all they're talking about is the damage to the property. And somebody said, Kendra said, the infiltrators are easy to spot. And that's what I was like, the people that are part of the movement, the local movements around the country, the grassroots movements for social justice and stuff. If you see like people that you've never seen before, urging protesters to engage in more and more extreme activity, and these are people you've never seen before in your life, you need to document that. Take pictures of these people. Track these people and encourage your demonstrators not to be led astray or to be amped up by these outside forces that want to destroy our movement. And the other thing is that, like, when you have people engage in that activity, all it does is help foment more police brutality. Because when the police are trying to suppress the protests, the protests that have turned violent, they escalate the violence. I just saw a video where you had this black couple in a car and you had the police escalate the situation, tase people, rip them out of the car and all that kind of stuff. And it doesn't appear like they were doing anything wrong. That kind of stuff is amped up when you have people engaging in violence. Shout out to Bonafide 1970. Yeah, so Kendra said the majority of the real protesters are there for racial injustices, racial inequality, and police violence towards black citizens. Absolutely. Like, I mean, I support the legitimate protesters 100%. I fully support them. And, you have some people that are so against these protests, period, like they're trying to speak bad against anybody that participates in protests and stuff like that. And that's not me. I don't, I would never speak harshly against the legitimate protesters, the people that are out there genuinely trying to fight for justice. I have no problem with them at all. I fully support their movement and what they're doing, the protests and everything. Um, but yeah, it's like we just got to be careful about this whole situation. Um, Shout out to the Sectorcon. Yeah, and then some Bonafide said he's heard about white nationalists masquerading as Black Lives Matter, and they're committing all kinds of vandalism, arson, knowing that it'll be blamed on black protesters. Because what they can do is say, yeah, look at those savages and all that kind of stuff. It fits their narrative of, all these negative stereotypes that they have about black people. And if they can masquerade as if they're down and they encourage people to engage in these things, they can just use that to discredit the movement. Because they could say, for instance, when these people are encouraged to loot stores, for instance, like athletic stores or stores like Gucci or Macy's, all they're gonna do is make it seem like, oh, they're not really about social justice. They're just about trying to steal things, using this as an opportunity to steal and all that kind of stuff. So let's see what other people are saying. Yeah, exactly. It diverts attention from the real issues. Bonafide 1970. Um, yeah, but this situation is crazy. But yeah, I just think that he's going to use it for photo ops and stuff like that. Use it to appear like he's in control and he's strong and stuff like that. And it's just a shame. Like the media is not even talking about this pandemic that's still going on. And one of my honest concerns about these protests is just like the whole social distancing piece. It's like all of that has gone out the window with these protests. Like a lot of the people aren't even wearing masks and stuff like that, and you have a dense number of people concentrated together. um, and I just hope that people are safe. I hope that people still maintain their face masks if they're participating in those protests, and so that they can be protected from this virus. Because the last thing that we would want is a situation where more and more black people die as they're fighting the unjustified death of another black person. Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Renaissance man. You said if people think that okay, yeah, it's buffering a little bit, so I'm gonna wrap this up before it gets messed up. But yeah, I think that that's a valid point. And the fringe should never, the activity of a few fringe people, these acts of violence should not discredit the movement. And and again, I'm not concerned about the my primary concern is the plight of my people. My primary concern is justice for George Floyd and all the other countless victims of police brutality. I'm just concerned about people using those agent provocateurs to crack down on our movement, because they use agent provocateurs to justify the arrest of legitimate black leadership during the counterintelligence program. They use agent provocateurs to spark violence between different groups and organizations and stuff. And I heard of at least one person that died during these demonstrations. All right, well, I'm not going to continue much longer. There's some issues with the internet, but peace and blessings, everyone. If you're watching this on the playback, excuse me, if you're watching this on the playback, please let me know what you think. Please comment, rate, and subscribe. Like the video, share the video, hit that notification bell so that you'll know when I post new content on here. Peace and blessings, everyone. Have a great day.